Hey guys, it's Dr. May. Welcome to another episode of Sensory Motor Psychotherapy. So today we're going to go over the somatic resource of our breath. Okay, so it wouldn't be complete if we didn't do a little breath work, right? Because the breath is a really important resource we can use to help ourselves in a variety of ways. So this one's called, as you can see, Using Your Breath. Okay. And I found a kind of a interesting, pretty graphic to go along with it. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the miracle of breath. And we really take breathing for granted, if you think about it. I mean, we can go probably about a month without food, or maybe about a few days to a week without water, but we can't go more than a few minutes without breathing. You know, it really is a sign of life. Like if you think about inspiration, it comes from the root of in spirit, and spirit has to do with our breath moving in and out, right? It's a sign that there's a spirit flowing within us, that we're animated to life. And one of the interesting things about breathing that we don't always think about, it's one of our physiological functions that are both conscious and unconscious. So if we weren't thinking about it, like when we're sleeping, for example, or just kind of going about our day, we'll forget to breathe. We're just going to naturally breathe because it's a reflex. But we could also put some conscious control over our breath. That we can deliberately choose to breathe slower or faster, or exercise different muscles while we breathe, right? So there is some conscious control. And that's one of the things we're going to capitalize on when using breath as a resource, right? And we can really appreciate our breath when we think about all that it does for us. So it really, as we breathe in, it's taking air in and allowing fuel and important chemicals to be delivered to our body. And as we exhale, it helps us release toxins and things that we no longer need. So there's a lot of symbolism in the breath, right? In a small way, it's about what we take in and what we let out, right? So sometimes we struggle with who we let in our life, or what we let in our life, or we let in too much or too little. And sometimes we have a hard time giving of ourselves, or sharing, or, letting things go and letting things out, right? So the breath is kind of tied into all those feelings that are related to the ins and outs of our lives, okay? And another important aspect of the breath is that it helps us to regulate our energy and arousal, okay? So if you remember back in other lessons, one of the important things we need to do is to find ways to expand our window of tolerance, which is our optimal level of arousal, and to stay there more often so we feel a little more comfortable and balanced in our life. So we can use our breath to help us stay in our window of tolerance. So it can help to decrease hyperarousal and increase hypoarousal, okay? So different ways of breathing can help us do that. All right, so now that we went over some of those facts. Here's a little fact about the inhales and the exhales. Okay, so when we inhale, sorry, the picture's a little, if I had to draw the picture, I would make it backwards so it was left to right. But anyway, let's look at the upper right. So when we inhale, it activates our sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system it increases our arousal. It gets us more ready for action, more ready for that fight or flight when it's at a higher level. Or it could be at a high level of comfortable arousal, like when you're energetic and talking and active and stuff like that. So the inhale energizes us, okay? The exhale relaxes us, right? When you have that deep exhale, it's a relaxing feeling because it activates our parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system, when it's in that optimal arousal zone, is responsible for relaxation, for rest and digest, and for calming us down. So exhales are good when we want to relax more. So we want to emphasize the exhale. So a little more about that later. All right. Another thing, as with all other somatic things that we've talked about, is that our breathing patterns were influenced by our history. Okay, just like our breathing patterns are also influenced by the way we currently are feeling, like if we're more tense right now versus more relaxed right now, our breathing is affected. But based on things we've gone through in our life, we've developed kind of more long-standing breathing patterns because there were ways of breathing that helped us to adapt to our circumstances, okay? Such as the expectations of our attachment figures, such as our parents, or the traumatic situations we've been through, okay? So I'm gonna talk about some common breathing patterns, and maybe as you listen to it, you'll identify yourself in some of these patterns. So one common pattern is hypoventilation or underbreathing, and that's associated with hypoarousal or low arousal. So what does this look like? So this is when you tend to have a breathing pattern that's more slow, shallow. Maybe you don't take as many breaths. There's a lot of space between breaths. There's a lot of sighs or extended exhales. Your breathing muscles are kind of flaccid, weak, hypotonic. There's not a lot of movement. So when you're in that shutdown, depressed, freeze, shame mode, hypoventilation often goes along with it, right? So think about a time, or maybe you're in that time right now, when you felt those kinds of emotions, or you felt in that freeze, hypoaroused mode, your breathing is very slow. So if you're really hypoaroused in the freeze response or the fold response and playing dead, you don't need a lot of air if you're dead, right? So that's why it's a very shallow breath. So let's say you're in a threat situation, you're a kid, you can't run away, you can't fight back, all you can do is freeze or fold. Breathing as little as possible makes as little noise as possible, keeps you as small as possible because there's less motion, and in some ways they have made you feel or kept you safer. So it was a pattern that you might have unconsciously developed to stay safe in what felt like a threatening or a dangerous situation, okay? And because it helped you in a threat situation, it could be a pattern that you've kept throughout your life into adulthood. And it might not be like that 100% of the time, but you might kind of gravitate toward it to feel safe because it helped you feel safe in the past, okay? It also, it keeps your emotions under wrap, right? When you're in a freeze mode, your emotions are shut down. You feel very numb, very cut off, your thoughts are foggy. And keeping your emotions out of the way also could have kept you safe. And the shallow breathing contributes to that. It helps in that process of hiding your emotions because being emotional could have been unsafe at the time, right? Okay. So if this is the case, sorry, I'm like talking without looking at the words here. One thing you can do is to increase your arousal by experimenting. The inhalation increases your arousal, right? It's associated with the sympathetic nervous system. So that brings it back into the window of tolerance with a stronger inhale, okay? All right, so the opposite, hyperventilation or overbreathing, which is associated with hyperarousal, right, which is increased arousal. And also the sympathetic nervous system, right, which has to do with fight or flight and getting activated and mobile to prepare for defense, okay? So what does this look like? This looks like high and fast, but shallow breathing. Right, I'm preparing for action, I'm running, I'm getting, revved up, right? So think about a time when you're really anxious, really angry. What was your breathing like? This is probably in this category, okay? So your breathing muscles are constricted and hypertonic, right? Kind of tight, right? Like that, okay? It's also, in some cases, could be associated with growing up with high expectations. I have to be good. I have to perform. I have to show I'm doing things right. I have to show that I'm perfect. And it keeps you in that anxious mode, this like, I have to do it. I have to keep achieving. I have to keep proving myself, right? So that's that anxious kind of hyperarousal breathing. It also is associated with symptoms such as emotional dysregulation, panic or anxiety, right? Kind of flows from that. Feeling scattered, off center, and ungrounded, right? When you're really anxious and up there, you don't feel very grounded and solid, and the breathing isn't very grounded either. High arousal, like I said before, increased expectation of danger, right? Because you're always like looking out for something. What's going on, right? Am I going to get ready? I have to do something to protect myself. All right. So if this sounds familiar to you, and this is a breathing pattern that you still have, one thing that can help is to experiment with a longer exhalation. because the exhalation is associated with relaxation and the parasympathetic nervous system. All right, so if you tune into how long is my inhalation versus my exhalation, right? If you just observe your breath, you might notice that it's a long inhalation and a short exhalation. So you could kind of tip the balance by lengthening the exhalation a little bit at a time. All right, so here's some other poor breathing habits we may have picked up, which may or may not fit into those categories. So just, think about yourself, think if any of this applies to you. Okay, so chronic breath holding. So a freeze response, right? I'm just trying to stay still. I'm not trying to make any noise. I'm trying to stay safe. I might have a habit of holding my breath. Shallow breathing, reduced volume of air exchange. So there's not a lot of air coming in or going out. Inspiration being confined to the upper chest. So you may have heard of like that shallow chest breathing, okay, which kind of keeps the tension flowing. Disturbances in the rate of breathing. So it might not be just purely fast or purely slow. It might be kind of uneven. Sometimes it's a little fast and it slows down and it's a little fast. Sometimes I've noticed even in myself that sometimes at certain times of emotional distress, my breathing is kind of fast and slow. It's back and forth. An imbalance of inhalation and exhalation. So just like I discussed before with the hyperarousal and hypoarousal style breathing, there's an imbalance, right? And we can work toward tipping that balance to regulate our arousal. Lack of graceful flow from inhale to exhale. So is there a long pause? Is it almost no pause at all? Is it an imbalance of a pause, right? How does that turning point feel to you? Also, difficulty exhaling and letting go fully, right? Especially if you're anxious. I know I found that sometimes it's really hard to exhale, like it takes like effort to exhale. And sometimes it's a symbol of having difficulty letting go of other things also. Okay, so breathing patterns and current symptoms. So if you're currently struggling with some symptoms, right, chances are it's correlated with the breathing that you have. So if you experience symptoms, it's related to your breathing. And if you breathe a certain way, it perpetuates your symptoms. So it's like a double arrow between the breathing and the symptoms. All right. So let's think about this, right? So it's associated with emotional dysregulation, fears, and always see something dangerous, and maybe always being afraid of something, always being angry at somebody and blaming, right? That's an emotional bias towards something, always taking things personally. Cognitive distortions. So not seeing things clearly, seeing it through a mental filter, such as like things always happen to me, bad things always happen to me. Everybody doesn't like me, people are against me. I'm never going to make it in this life. Cognitive distortions. Even relationship difficulties. All right, so think about it. If I'm really anxious, it might be hard for me to relax and open up in a relationship. Or if I'm really shut down and I have shallow breathing, it might keep me so in my own world and shut in in my own little freeze bubble that it's hard for me to connect with people. I'm not in my social engagement mode, which has to do with a healthy pattern of breathing. All right, so talking about healthy patterns of breathing, it is possible to develop healthy breathing patterns. So even if you've had for a long time some of those breathing issues I just discussed, it's not too late to work on developing healthy breathing patterns. And today I have a bunch of exercises at the end all about this, okay? And some of the advantages of it, right? It tends to help us feel healthier physically and emotionally. People who have healthy breathing patterns actually tend to live longer, they say, and feel better. And when we breathe in a full and a balanced way. So also, some of the advantages, exploring different breathing interventions, which we're going to talk about later, can help us to regulate our hyper and hypoarousal, as I mentioned, provide energy or foster relaxation, depending on our current needs, increase or decrease emotional intensity, and promote physical health. All right, so there's a lot of advantages. At the same time, it's also common to worry, kind of be concerned about changing our breathing. We might be in a breathing pattern that's not supporting us right now. But because it's a habit, because it might be associated with a time where it protected us or kept us safe in some way, it's hard to let it go, right? So I might be afraid, like, geez, like I'm so used to holding my breath or breathing shallow because that made me feel small and not make noise and be safe, that it feels a little scary to take a big breath. Like I feel too visible, I feel too open, or it opens up feelings and emotions I'm not sure I want to feel. So there is, it makes sense to feel some anxiety about this, okay? So you could think about what your concerns are and process these concerns with your therapist if you have one, or maybe journal about it. But it's okay to acknowledge some concerns you might have about working on your breath, all right? Okay, so one thing we can do to ease the process if you do have concerns is to always take it slowly. You don't have to have an extreme sudden change in your breathing patterns. It doesn't have to be an all or none proposition. We can experiment with small changes. And as we change and try little things, we could notice its effect on us and see how it feels, okay? And some of the exercises later are gonna take us through doing that. So we could just start by observing our breath and then make these little changes with awareness and work with your therapist if you have one. If not, just kind of observe within yourself. And if it feels uncomfortable or you feel triggered, just stop. Just go back to your normal breathing pattern. It's okay, all right? And you could always try again another time if you want to. Okay, so I have a bunch of exercises for you, like I mentioned, so let's get to it. Okay, so first, all we're gonna ask is to notice your breath. You don't have to change anything. This is like a real exercise in radical acceptance. Like how many times could we notice something in ourselves and be okay with it and not want to change it and just accept it the way it is in this moment, okay? Perfect example, we're just gonna notice our breath, okay? So just take some time to be mindful and tune in to your normal breathing without changing a thing. And as you're breathing, notice how you're feeling. See if you could put an emotion to what you're currently feeling with your current breath, okay? Another thing you can notice without having to change it is what is your posture like, all right? We talked about posture in the last video, all right? So as you're breathing, am I straight up? Am I stiff? Am I slumped? What's going on with my posture, all right? Or do I feel any tightness in my neck or shoulders or anywhere else that's associated with my posture, okay? Then, kind of describe the way your breath is going. So is it fast or slow? Is it deep or is it shallow? Smooth or kind of jerky? And regular or irregular? All right, so just notice it. Be curious about it. Notice if your current breath feels comfortable, natural, and easy, or if it feels strained, tense, or uncomfortable, okay? All right, so continue to notice the breath. This is the next slide. So you can notice which is longer, your inhale or your exhale, right? Because this is related to our arousal. Or are they approximately the same? You could mindfully tune into your ribs as you inhale. Do you feel them moving? Do you sense movement mostly in your upper chest? Do you feel movement in your sides or even in your back, like the TVA muscle we discussed in the last video? And you could describe if and how your way of breathing changed as you observed it. Sometimes as much as we try to keep it the same, just the act of observing it changes it a little bit, all right? So we can be honest with ourselves. Did I tweak it a little bit just because I noticed? Sometimes, all right. And what did you learn about your normal way of breathing? Hopefully you noticed something you haven't noticed before, but if not, just, maybe you learned something. And how do you feel after doing this exercise? So you can just check in with yourself and your emotions. Okay, next. All right, so this exercise is called posture, tension, and breath, because all of them are really kind of interrelated if you think about it. All right, so you're just going to start by either sitting in a chair with a hard surface, so you're not like, all smushed in a comfy couch like that, just like a regular desk chair or a kitchen chair. So, or you want to stand, you could stand, and just, tune in and describe your breath as it is right now, okay? Then tune into your posture. So we're incorporating some of the last lesson into this, right? So describe your posture. Is your spine aligned, slumped, rigid, or tense? all right? The three main posture types we discussed last time. Do you feel any tension in your neck or shoulders, or maybe your stomach, maybe you're really tight, it's hard to breathe, or anywhere else in your body, okay? So just notice it. Then try lengthening your spine. So we're not gonna stiffly rigid up like that. We're just gonna imagine we're being pulled from the top and our feet are pressing to the floor. So extending on both sides, okay? And as you gently extend yourself, all right, how does your breathing change? Okay, next. So now we're gonna experiment by adding some tension on purpose, okay? So like the picture is doing, like just try to shrug your shoulders a little bit and make your shoulders tense on purpose. So hold that tension and notice what that does to your breath. Then relax your shoulders and notice what that does to your breath, okay? Then try tensing your belly and notice what happens to your breathing. And then relax your belly and then notice what happens to your breathing again, okay? All right, so then we're gonna try just breathing from our upper chest, right? Without, trying to move anything else, just try to breathe from up here. Then try to breathe in both your chest and your belly, okay? And then notice, then breathe only in your belly. First your chest only, then your belly only, then your chest and your belly together. Okay, sorry I said it out of order. So just notice the differences between those three different styles of breathing. Okay, all right, next. You're gonna purposely let your posture slump. So before the instruction was to lengthen, now we're just gonna slump on purpose, okay? And after you do that, notice how your breathing changes. Then on purpose, we're gonna have a rigid upright posture and then notice again how your breathing changes, okay? So then now that we did all this stuff, okay, you can do a little self-assessment and think like, well, okay, which types of positions felt most familiar to me? Like which are the ones that I think I tend to do more frequently, all right? And then think, well, all right, now that I've noticed this, is there any of these physical habits I think I may want to start to work on changing, okay? So one way to get at changing our breath is to change the posture and the tension associated with the breath. So there's small changes we can make with those things that could then have an impact on the breath. As we noticed in this exercise, I hope you noticed after trying it, that changing posture, changing tension does affect your breathing, okay? So maybe there's some ways to shift it so that your breath becomes more natural, more healthy and flowing. All right. Next lesson. Okay, so this one's called Different Ways of Breathing, part 1. Okay, so the first thing, like we did before, you're going to notice our normal breathing pattern right now without messing with it. But now we're giving you some words, some descriptive words, like a breath vocabulary to describe what is going on with your breath. So are you breathing through your nose, through your mouth, mostly in the chest? Are your ribs moving or not moving? Are you breathing mostly in the belly? Okay. And on the right, I have some other descriptors. Are you holding your breath? Is it shallow? Is it labored? Like it feels like it's hard to breathe, right? Is it struggled? Is it winded? You feel like out of breath. Is it steady? Is it heavy or sighing? Maybe associated with hypoarousal, right? Is it fast, such as associated with hyperarousal? Is it irregular? Different lengths of inhales and exhales keeps changing. Does it feel tight? Does it feel deep and slow? Is there a longer exhale than inhale, or is there a longer inhale than exhale? So go down that list and see if any of those apply to your breathing. All right, so we're giving you more descriptive words than maybe you had in the first lesson, first exercise rather, today. Okay, so now that you notice the normal stuff, we're going to experiment with some slight changes to see what the impact is and observe it. Okay, so the first thing is we're going to do what we call taking tiny sips of breath. Okay, so sometimes it's hard to just take a deep breath and in one shot and inhale, or take a long exhale on one shot. So we're just going to increase it by small increments. Right? So see what I did? I took little sips of breath, so to speak, like taking little sips of a drink with a straw, okay? And just gradually, step by step, increase it, and then gradually, step by step, decrease it. Okay? There actually is a breathing exercise that I learned in yoga where you deliberately did this, like you did 4 steps in and then 4 steps out. And there's other ones that have multiple steps in, you know, so they actually have some of the stuff in yoga. But here you could do it however number of sips that you like to take, just to experiment, okay? And this allows you to have some control and to do it gradually. Okay, so next thing you can try, just as a little something different, experiment, you could lay down on your back like the guy in the picture and put your hands on your belly, all right? And just notice the feeling of your belly against your hands as you're inhaling and exhaling. You might also sense what your ribs are doing or what your chest is doing, okay? But it gives you a different perspective on your breath to do it lying down like that versus standing up. So it might give you some different insights. All right. Another thing you can try, which will also give you a different perspective, is to put your hands on your ribs, kind of like the person in the picture, okay? And as you inhale, you could probably sense your ribs moving apart. And as you exhale, you could sense your ribs coming together. So you feel like a little bit of this thing going on. And it's similar to the exercise we did in the last lesson about sensing your TVA. It's a similar kind of emotion, all right? So just notice what that feels like while you breathe. Okay, so then next, we're gonna try emphasizing the inhale. So lengthening your inhale, letting it be a little longer than your exhale, right? So this is supposed to be more energizing. All right, so try that for a few minutes and notice how it affects your arousal and your window of tolerance. And just notice what you're experiencing. Okay, so now as you guessed, we're gonna do the opposite, okay? So you could start out by just exhaling fully and letting the air just fall out, right? Let it fall out of your body, allowing just gravity to do the work. You don't have to push it out, just sigh it out almost. Then you could switch a little bit and experiment with pushing the air out, exhaling longer than the inhale. So this should be a little bit more relaxing. So notice how this affects your arousal and window of tolerance and notice what you're experiencing. Okay, so now that you tried some of these different things, just kind of check in and think, yeah, all right, so which way of breathing feels most natural to you and which feels particularly good or resourcing, right? Because we want to really notice that because it might be a kind of breath pattern we would want to do more often, or we might want to do on purpose in a stressful situation, or we might want to just, practice a little bit, okay? So which way of breathing, might you use in the future as a resource to alter your arousal or mood? All right. So you have to try it first to know. So we tried a few things and it gives us some idea. Okay, so developing a resource in breathing. All right, so here we are. So this isn't like I'm going to sit down and do this breathing exercise. This is kind of like I want you to be mindful throughout the day or across a period of time and notice times when your breathing particularly feels good. So you might catch yourself being like, wow, that deep breath I just took spontaneously, like that actually felt pretty good. Or you might notice like you're having a relaxed conversation with a friend and you're like, yeah, my breathing feels kind of relaxed and nice right now. I'm digging it, I'm enjoying it, right? So just catch yourself in a pattern of breathing that feels good and notice what it is about that breathing that feels good because we want to harness that and try to do it again, all right? So think about the moments, situations, or people you were with when your breathing felt good, okay? And what felt good about the way you were breathing. It's good to know also what's spurring on this good breathing, right? Because maybe you want to do those things more often. And what was the effect of breathing this way? So how did it impact your building blocks? Like when I was breathing in this comfortable, easy manner, it affected my thoughts, it affected my emotions in what way? And how did it affect my body sensations? What was going on with me physically, somatically, as my breathing was normal and felt nice, all right? And so when might I then try to use this breathing type on purpose to help me? All right, so maybe it naturally arose in a situation where you were feeling good, you were comfortable, but now you want to try to recreate that breath pattern in a situation where you're stressed out, right? And doing that might help you feel less stress in that other situation, okay? So you got to file away, what was that thing that felt good? How do I do it again, all right? Okay, so now we're going to flip it around. So while you go through your week, I want you to pay attention and think about what's a time when my breathing did not feel good. All right, for some of us, this might be a little easier to find than the other one, right? So you might find that it's a little more often that your breath does not feel good. So just notice what about it doesn't feel good, all right? So think about what triggered the changes in your breathing that didn't feel good. What was going on, okay? Were you remembering something? Were you having a difficult interaction with someone? Were you in a certain setting that was uncomfortable? Okay, what was happening that triggered this uncomfortable breath pattern? And what was it about that breath pattern that felt uncomfortable, right? Was it tense? Was it shallow? Was it erratic? What was it about it, okay? And so how did your breathing relate to your arousal? Okay, so for some of us, the breathing might have felt uncomfortable because it created hyperarousal. It was fast, it was shallow, it was tense. For other people, it might have been related to hypoarousal. Maybe it didn't feel good because it was so shallow and I felt so sluggish and so dead inside and so numb that that's what felt bad to me. All right, so think about what was it about my breath that didn't feel good and which arousal state was I in when I was feeling that, okay? All right, next. All right, so now we're going to harness this information. So on purpose, at some other time, when you're kind of feeling neutral, purposely try to recreate that breathing pattern that didn't feel good. All right, think about what it was and try to do it. Okay, then I want you to think of, well, how do I now change my breathing so it does feel good? And then I could use it as a resource. So can you actually toggle between the bad breathing and the good breathing? Okay, so you discovered the good breathing before this. So now we're going to pair them together. All right, so once you shift from the bad breathing to the good breathing, how does it impact you? Is it now regulating your arousal or changing your emotions or your thinking or your body in some other way? All right, and that's the last one. I forgot that was the last one. All right, so I hope this gave you some good ideas, a lot of things to try. All right, so this should keep you busy for a while. All right, so thanks for tuning in, and I'll be back soon with the next installment of sensory motor psychotherapy. All right, thanks guys, be good.